Hello and welcome to the World Traveler Cooking podcast episode series on diabetes. This episode is on trying to take a lot of the material that I've covered over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and put it together into something of a plan to recover as best as possible. Now, as I've mentioned before, recovery is something which is very much on a continuum, and depending upon how early things are caught, that recovery might not be complete. But I want to weave together a lot of the things I've talked about and talk about some of the aspects of making all of this work which emerge out of the combination of items. The first is that a lot of times people come to these sorts of videos because they're looking for an alternative to the medical advice that they're being given. One of the things that's really important is actually to work with your doctor, but also to understand what your doctor can do for you and what your doctor can't do for you. Modern medicine is a field which involves, to a large extent, trying to be a good technician on the human body. This means that doctors tend to think in terms of what they can prescribe. They also think in terms of certain kinds of lifestyle counseling that they can give, but that kind of advice is very limited. So the second thing to understand is that the medical community today has a much narrower view of the illness than the scientific community. So what this means is that what your doctor can do for you is your doctor can help reduce the progression of the illness, help you with damage control. So it's very important to work with your doctor, take the medical advice, and work with it as best you can, and see this as a series of damage control measures. Anything that you get from this series goes beyond that. But it assumes that you are working with a physician on this basic aspect. The next thing that's really important is to come up with a series of good metrics to see how you're doing. Now, for myself, I track the following items. How well am I sleeping? How many times am I waking up in the middle of the night? Last night I woke up once, which is good. If I wake up 4 or 5 times, that's a warning sign. Because that's a good indication of how much cortisol is in your system in the middle of the night. Another thing that I watch very carefully is I watch changes to my weight. Now, the overall consensus viewpoint, which doesn't match my experience, and I'll explain where I think the difference is in a moment, is that weight itself, and therefore body fat, is a risk factor for diabetes. I think this actually gets part of the relationship backwards. What I've noticed in myself is that I go through weight gains and losses which are fast enough that they cannot be explained through body fat. In fact, they cannot be explained in any significant part through body fat. I have gone through cases where I've gained 7 kilograms, that's like 15 pounds, over the course of 2 weeks. Cases where I've lost a similar amount of weight, again, over the course of 2 weeks. The only way you can gain or lose that much weight, unless you're sitting around eating bars of solid fat all day, is if a lot of that weight is water weight. My working theory is that inflammation may be causing weight gains or losses, or the inflammation may cause weight gains, and the reduction of inflammation may cause weight losses, which itself may directly impact some of what's going on with the illness. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to watch your weight and trying to achieve a healthier lifestyle. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But keeping a close eye on your weight And watching for sudden increases and sudden decreases is another good point. Sudden increase probably means you're not doing very well. Sudden decrease might indicate that you're on the right track and keep doing what you're doing. A third point that I want to make has to do with alcohol consumption. Now, one of the very interesting points of alcohol consumption is that for people who consume a small amount of alcohol occasionally, it reduces cortisol secretion. So, occasional consumption of alcohol might be helpful. Problem is, people who consume alcohol frequently or in large quantities, and in large quantities, tend to find that alcohol consumption increases cortisol secretion. This is shown in a number of scientific studies also. So, in these particular cases, you don't want to be drinking alcohol all the time. Save it for special occasions. Don't drink very much when you drink it. If you're going to try to reduce cortisol with alcohol consumption, having a certain number of days a week, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, no more than that, when you are willing to drink alcohol, fine, and then make sure that you also have dry days to keep the regular consumption effect from making things worse. The next point I want to talk about briefly is we've talked a lot about the impact of stress. One thing that's really important is to have a continuous process of root cause analysis, looking for signs of stress. Not only, keeping track of how are you feeling, how are you sleeping, things like that, but continuing to look at your life and saying, this is causing me stress, I need to change it. Sometimes you can make peace with it, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're going to have a habitual stress response, and then maybe it's time to change something major. Like, one of the first things I did was I left my job because of a habitual stress response. So those are some of the main points. But beyond that, then what? If you think about diabetes not as an insulin resistance problem by itself, but as a human performance management problem and a human energy management problem, then you have a bunch more tools at your disposal. You can cut down on your obligations to get lots of work done, for example. You can try to do less with your life. You can try to go out and enjoy things more. We've talked about exercise. I'm trying to, almost every day I'm walking 8 to 10 kilometers. I'm also doing some meditation in the park under the trees. All of that is really helpful. And in fact, the meditation piece has been something that has improved all of the signs that I'm looking at more than anything else, more even than the exercise. Diet, of course, we've talked about. Please see my episode on that. Again, control portions of carbohydrates and proteins. You can shift calories to fats, particularly high-quality anti-inflammatory fats like olive oil. Those are sort of the key tactics. But the strategy has to be one of relaxing and trying to live a good, relaxed, lower pressure, and happy life. To this effect, I also recommend that you keep a list of all of the things that you think you need to do to improve your health. Because chances are you know that topic better than I do. And you need to start doing them. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just start working on all of these items, and start today. I have heard of people who have recovered better than expected from this illness. I've also heard of people who haven't. But from what we know from all the scientific research, from the link to cortisol and the link of stress to cortisol, from the links to the inflammatory response in the body, from this metabolic syndrome idea where resistance to cortisol itself causes hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin in the blood, which leads to organ damage. These are all things which you can use. But again, it's not a substitute, it's a supplement to working with your doctor on the damage control piece. So you work with your doctor on the damage control piece, and then you take control of your lifestyle, of all of the pieces that are giving you massive stress, all the things you feel like you need to improve your health, and you go and do them. That's the end of this series. I'll be back next week, or perhaps in a couple of weeks, with another series. Thank you and have a great week.